So, I'm Gari Carter, and I'm neither a scientist or a medical expert. I'm your patient. I'm the person on the operating table, the couch, or in your classroom. My little story is about my experience with Hemi-Sync and life over the past 34 years. It turned me into an ambassador for the Monroe Institute. And I was especially interested by listening to Dr. Sheely this morning because so much of what he talked about is what I've been living. So, as he said, we're all on the same page, and it makes such a difference. Saturday, February 27th, 1982, began with light snow flurries. My 11-year-old son and I were driving that day to Baltimore for a gift show to find fill-ins for the shop before my next buying trip to New York. Whoops, I forgot a little bit. Sorry about that. Haven't done this in a while. I'll tell you the beginning of the story, and then you'll see a short film by Paramount Pictures for a TV show, which has interviews from the Monroe Institute, my doctors, and my children. I'll cover what has happened since then afterwards, and we'll have time for a few questions before lunch. And I'll be available to sign books later today in the back. In 1982, I lived a very proper life in a small town north of Charlottesville. I was married to an attorney, had 2 children, 11 and 14, and owned and managed a successful clothing and gift shop. I started modeling in my teens, was well educated, had several careers, and spoke 4 languages fluently, which I used in embassy work and teaching. My life was very conservative with traditional values. Now, Saturday, February 27, 1982, began with light snow flurries. My 11-year-old son and I were driving that day to Baltimore for a gift show to find fill-ins for the shop before my next buying trip to New York. I had no idea that a pivotal experience was about to change my life. I went by the shop to finalize the list of what I needed to order at the show with my manager. My son and I began driving from our little town and entered the wilderness where a Civil War battle was fought. The snow increased, and my son and I discussed turning around and going home, but we decided to drive 5 more minutes. Now I always pay attention to my intuition. As we drove around a curve, we saw a car rapidly coming at us on our side. There were guardrails on the 2-lane road, and I had nowhere to escape. All I could think was that my son had to be all right. I didn't care what happened to me. The car hit us head on. After the car stopped spinning around, my son lifted a plastic trash bag which had flown onto his face. We have no idea where that trash bag came from. He wiggled his fingers and toes and realized he was all right. He didn't have a scratch on him. He got out and came around to my side to get me out, and his door fell off as he opened his door. Suddenly he realized as he looked at me that his mother didn't have a face anymore, and I wasn't breathing. The week before in Cub Scouts, he'd learned CPR, and he did the first steps then and brought me back. The oncoming car had pushed the steering wheel into my face and the engine into my legs. I was trapped in the car, and my son began yelling for help. A woman in a trailer nearby heard the sound of the crash and my son calling. She phoned the rescue squad and took him and the 4 girls from the other car into her trailer to keep warm from the snow. She brought a blanket out to cover me. At the time of the crash, I was catapulted into a near-death experience. I went through the sparkling tunnel and into the garden. The garden was so vibrant, it made my former life look like a pale imitation. My father, who'd been dead about 10 years, appeared. I thought how happy I was to be with him again. And he thought back that he was glad to see me too, but I couldn't stay, as I had a purpose to finish in my life. I thought, no, I have 2 wonderful children, a successful business. What else could I possibly have to do? My father couldn't tell me, but he repeated that I'd know when it happened. And as I was protesting no, no, no on one hand to my father, my son was pulling me back into life on the other hand with a CPR. So trapped in the car, I was in a coma with little flashes of lucidity. The engine caught on fire, and a passing car the man in a passing car saw the flames and saw my shop logo on the side of the car. And he stopped and threw snow on the engine and disconnected everything he could in it and reassured me that I would be all right, and then drove off. I was still worried about my son, but I couldn't speak or see. The husband of my shop manager was on the rescue squad, and they both came to the scene of the crash. She went into the trailer to console my son, and her husband went out to help the squad members. He came back to tell his wife that it didn't look as if I would survive. The town had just been able to buy the Jaws of Life machine to pull cars apart, and used it on mine. A squad member slipped into the passenger seat and put her arm around my shoulders and said quietly that I'd be okay. She would stay with me, she wouldn't leave me, and there would be loud noises as the machine started to pull the car apart. I felt comforted and safe, but I wondered how my son was. Next, it felt as if angel wings were picking me up and floating me into the rescue squad van. There was no pain. The tech began cutting up the sides of my sleeves and up the legs of my slacks. And I remember my mother always telling me to wear clean underwear in case I was in an accident. And they didn't look at it, they just cut it up. My son was taken with me to the University of Virginia ER, where he was checked and released. My former husband and daughter had come to the crash site and were now at the hospital calling family members. A friend came and took the children for the night. The next morning, my son found one of my teeth caught in his hair. And my friend saved it in a Bloomingdale's jewelry box in case I needed it for tooth matching later on. I still have that Bloomingdale's jewelry box with the tooth. Meanwhile, I had flashes of worry that my son was not all right. I was confused by all the noise, people, lights, and seeming chaos in the ER. Beginning with the tracheotomy, orthopedic and plastic surgeons closed up my face, which was open from the chin to the eyes, and repaired the 3/4 severed right leg, broken ankle, crushed legs, and feet. Since I'd lost a great deal of blood, I was given several transfusions. The doctors weren't sure I was going to survive the trauma. Coma time was blurry time for me, blurry pain. My only sense available was auditory. I could hear clearly when alert, but I couldn't see because my eyes were stitched up. I couldn't talk or taste due to the tracheostomy, and it terrified me to have the half-breaths from the ventilator. Without a nose, I couldn't smell. My body was either tied or weighted down. The pain enveloped me and increased dramatically with any movement. I had no idea where or who I was or what had happened. I just existed in pain as the time passed. I regained consciousness later, but worried about my son, never believing anyone's assurances. My mother arrived, and I slowly improved in the UVA hospital. For communication, I was given a pad on my stomach and a pen to use with my right hand to write. My children were allowed to visit after a few weeks. When I finally realized my son was all right, I wanted to cry with relief, but my eyes couldn't manage tears, and I couldn't speak. My daughter fainted when she saw what was left of my face, and couldn't look at me for years afterwards. When she thought of me, she remembered my first model's face. This was my introduction to how people would perceive my new appearance. A face cannot be hidden with clothing. I'd never been hurt before or broken anything. I still thought I just had a few scars and I'd be running down the hospital corridors soon. I just existed in this pain-filled time. Small changes happened during those long weeks in the hospital. A kind nurse washed my bloody hair one night. My mother got me a Bugs Bunny magic slate to replace the pad and pen. My glasses were adjusted to stay on my face without a nose, though I was told my vision might take over a year to stabilize. Orthopedics put a cast from hips to toes on my right side. I was taught to sit up a little more each day. I was terrified by the ventilator's half-breaths, and especially when it was shut off for cleaning and aspirating. And I'd like to know how many of you in here have been on a ventilator ever? Yes, I know you, Bob. Nobody else. Okay, I want you all to experience what it's like if you'd like to. The way to do it is to take a really big full breath all the way up to the top of your throat. Then let it out just about this far, a teeny bit. And now try to take a full breath. So you just get that much of a breath. That's all you can ever get on a ventilator. And you can never get a full breath, and you're always terrified the next breath won't be there. It's really, really scary. So for anybody who has COPD or anything like that, now you know how they feel. And if you have any friends on a ventilator, you can understand. It's very different from real life. I had no idea before. Going back to the chronology, a shattered tooth was discovered and pulled, lessening but not deleting the constant tsunami of pain. My weight had dropped to 85 pounds on the IVs. My bones stuck out everywhere and hurt. The pain never relented, only diminished with drugs every few hours. My yoga and Sufi teacher came to visit me and had many suggestions from his health food store about how to put on weight and heal. He reminded me of my former yogic breathing to control pain. He added that an opportunity arises out of every crisis, and I might think what gift came to me from that experience. Since I was unable to read, he left me with two favorite quotes to remember by Hazrat Inayat Khan from Gyan Vadan Nirtan. And the first is, what has happened is happened. What I am going through, I shall rise above. And what will come, I will meet with courage. I'll say that again. What has happened is happened. What I am going through, I shall rise above. And what will come, I will meet with courage. And the second was, being alone with oneself is like being with a best friend whose company will last forever. Being alone with oneself is like being with a best friend whose company will last forever. I have them in calligraphy on my bathroom wall to repeat every day. As I thought about my past, I realized that I'd worked hard for what I was taught to value: marriage, children, and successful and profitable careers. They'd been swept away by that car crash. I despaired at being an ugly, deformed cripple in a reduced life. I longed for a mentor to guide me on my new unknown path, but none appeared. Slowly, the understanding came to me that this was my chance to live my second life with the spiritual values that I cared about: love, harmony, good health, helping others, peace, and beauty. And so I did, though they were not considered proper by my conservative family. After a month, the ostomy tube was withdrawn from my neck and the opening sewn closed. I took the first exciting breath of real air, which gave me hope for a life again. After all the frustration with that ventilator, I was free. I wrote on my magic slate, "May I talk?" And the doctor nodded yes. And I said, "Thank you." I was surprised at the feelings in my weird toothless mouth and raw throat and the low sound of the tone. The doctor said that only one of my vocal cords was functioning. My voice might get smoother as the throat healed, and it might rise in pitch. My first voice was high and squeaky, and I had recordings of my narrating radio commercials from my shop with which I could compare voices. but I kept my Bugs Bunny magic slate. Next, the IV tubes were removed, and I was taught how to eat with a Brecht feeder. It is a clear, fat plastic syringe with a foot-long rubber tube on the end. I practiced with water first, and I squirted water all over my face, my clothes, the wall, the floor, everything. I was not allowed to use a mirror, which might have made the job easier. But once I succeeded, that first trickle of water down my throat eased the pain and felt so delicious. It took me a while to learn to eat soup successfully with the Brecht feeder. Dr. Milton T. Edgerton was the gifted maxillofacial surgeon who was to reconstruct my face. He was a pioneer in plastic surgery, working at Valley Forge after World War II, and he started the first craniofacial clinics at Johns Hopkins and the University of Virginia. Today, Dr. Edgerton is 96 and lives in Charlottesville. His schedule was set 5 years in advance, and I had to be healed before I could be put on the waiting list for each next step. My job was to recover as fast as possible, and I still hurt. Meanwhile, my foot swelled, the cast had to be cut off. Neurology could give me no answers as to why I remembered French and Spanish and Italian, but not English, my mother tongue, or that my short-term memory was fleeting. My mother spoke French to me, and a nurse Spanish. I began torturous physical therapy, which hurt, and started the incredibly difficult process to learn to move again. After 6 weeks, Dr. Edgerton felt I could go home. I couldn't wait. My mother brought in a loose dress, a slip, and underpants for me to wear. But when the nurse dressed me, the underpants fell off because I was so thin at 85 pounds. So she used a pin to hold them together. And we laughed. The only option to get home was the local hearse because I couldn't sit in a car yet. And I thought how ironic it was to be alive in the back of the hearse. The outside world was so bright and surprisingly sparkly compared to my hospital world. It was a thrill to be carried inside my house and see my children and our dog and cat. My mother had arranged a hospital bed in the dining room in the center of the house. I fell into an easy sleep at home. My mother hired nurses for the daytime and took the night shift herself. I learned to use baby food in the Brecht feeders and worked each day on gaining more weight, strength, and mobility. When my mother was out one day, I managed to get one of the nurses to bring me a mirror to see my face for the first time. She looked at me apprehensively, and I reassured her. I'd imagined a mess, but optimistically I could see signs of healing on the suture lines. I was a long way from better. I returned to the UVA to have the cast removed and be fitted with a brace and crutches. And next, physical therapy for my first walking lesson, which hurt, required immense concentration, was really difficult. If I fell, I couldn't get up by myself. My children were great teachers, calling out left leg, right leg, as I practiced walking with the crutches. And we joked that we'd all been parents and children of each other. Alone with my thoughts, I still found it difficult to meditate, could not read more than a few words at a time, had a short attention span, and disliked TV. I asked my mother to look at my stack of mail and find my copy of the Daily Word by Unity. I was able to read a short paragraph of inspiration and repeat that thought to myself. I memorized one quote a day from my old favorite quote book and slowly built up to reading a page out of a book. I began writing in my journal again. Since I acted the role of cheerful patient in public, I wrote the underlying frustration and sorrow out in the journal. It made me more conscious that the first life values of money, social status, and appearance were not valuable in my second life since the car crash. My new life values formed themselves into good health, love, harmony, integrity, helping others, and peace in my life. I was amazed at the outpouring of flowers, presents, notes, and phone calls from current and past friends, acquaintances, distant relatives, from former places I'd lived and worked. I'd done that for others in the past as a duty, but now I was the recipient. It's easy to be a giver, but now I was learning the hard lesson of receiving, especially when I had nothing to give back. Slowly, I was weaned from the crutches by the local physical therapist to learn to really walk. It was really difficult to learn how to swing my arms, and I despaired of ever dancing, skiing, sailing, skating again. I understood why one doctor had told me it was unlikely I would walk again. I determined that no one would stop me, and I would succeed with each difficult task. My children made games out of walking, and slowly I improved. One day I could even stand unaided, and my mother decided I was ready for another milestone, a shower. I felt truly clean again. Next, I was cleared to eat with a spoon and drink from a cup. It was even harder than the breastfeeder, as I poured cups of water down my front and hurt my cheek trying to get a spoon in my mouth. My children helped again, and I used mirrors on the table in front of me. The physical therapist taught me to stick out my tongue to guide the cup into my mouth over the lips which had no feeling, and then I could drink again in public. Suddenly, Dr. Edgerton's schedule had an opening. A new member of the maxillofacial team had arrived from Harvard. Dr. Chong had degrees in maxillofacial surgery and dentistry, and Dr. Edgerton wanted him to redo my jaws. I returned for reconstruction of my cheeks, smoothing of the bones around the eyes, refracturing the jaws, maxilla and mandible, so that they'd fit together, graft gum tissue inside the mouth, and start shaping lips. I was terrified and freezing before that surgery, and I hated the aluminum taste of the drip of anesthesia down my throat as I went under. After, the pain was worse than the beginning, and I was miserable. My head was swollen, covered with Frankenstein bandages, my jaw wired shut, packed and covered with plastic forms. My abdomen burned at the graft site, and I drooled constantly. I had to return to breastfeeders and live with a towel pinned around my neck to catch the drool. My memory diminished from the new anesthesia, and I was reduced back to almost where I was at the time of the car crash. I was devastated. I had no idea it would be so difficult and ugly, with total lack of independence again. Drool and pain are intolerable when one doesn't know when they're going to stop. It took weeks before some of the packing and wires could be removed from the jaw, then months before the rest could be eliminated. I was told to rinse with salt water and begin eating soft foods again, but I still drooled. My dentist started on teeth after that. The plan was to put in bridges, so most of the healthy teeth that were left had to be ground down to make caps to hold the bridges. I went to his office every day, all day long, for a week. The pain was excruciating, and I dissolved into tears over and over. I was fitted with temporary blinding white plastic teeth. I'd looked forward to biting an apple since that car crash, but I now found that my new porcelain teeth would be rounded, and I'd always have to cut up any food and never bite apple or corn or popcorn or taffy. Weeks later, the final teeth looked lovely, but functioned differently, and I still drooled. To keep the teeth clean, I had to brush left and right-handed to cover all the spots. I was given 5 different brushes and floss and threader and water pick to use each time I ate. I had to keep that new mouth immaculate, so I'd never have to go through that torture again. The new palate was higher and narrower than my first mouth, and food stuck there if I took a large bite. It was impossible to get the food out with my tongue, and I had to pry it out with a fork. So I learned to take ladylike bites again. Another mortifying aspect of being a reconstructed woman. Dr. Edgerton gave me a choice of what facial part I missed most for the next surgery. I chose the nose, a rhinoplasty. And then I had another choice of plastic or rib. But the plastic might warp or get infected and have to be removed. So I chose bone. I selected photos of noses I liked from Women's Wear Daily for Dr. Edgerton. And originally I had 100 pictures that I'd pulled out, and he said, Gary, if we could narrow it down to 3 or 4, it would make my job easier. So I did. But I was going to hurt in 2 places this time. One where they took out the rib, and second where they put it in to make the nose. And I was really afraid of the pain again. Dr. Edgerton sent me to his department's clinical psychologist, Dr. Langman, to deal with the changes in my life and body. When I looked in a mirror, I was to think of my face in transition instead of disfigured. And children stared at my face because they were afraid it might happen to them if they looked away. And adults stared because they wanted to know what happened. Eventually, one day it would be over, and then I'd blend in the crowd, and I'd notice other people staring at others, and I'd remember how it felt for me. Dr. Langman reminded me that after the rhinoplasty, I would be unable to wear glasses or a bra due to the rib removal. A very insistent acquaintance called me up to tell me of some experimental pain control tapes. And I knew if I didn't follow up, she would keep reminding me. So I called the Monroe Institute, and my life changed. I now look at my pre-Monroe life as pale, and post-Monroe as filled with vibrant light, similar to my near-death experience. But I didn't know that then. Helen Waring, the registrar, was kind to me on the phone and said that the emergency series would be perfect for my future surgeries, explained how the tapes worked, and that she would send me a set. Little did I know that this would be the greatest gift of my life. When the package arrived, I laid out on my bed and tried the first pre-op tape. I loved every second, and I jumped up. I felt pain-free, refreshed, relaxed, and full of energy afterwards. I jumped up to do about 1,000,000 things and was overwhelmed with dizziness. I quickly got back down on the bed till I was balanced again. Now I can go in and out easily, but I had to learn in the beginning. I practiced with those tapes every day and felt calmer and less painful. I wasn't sure that Hemi-Sync was going to help with surgery, but I was willing to try anything. Amazingly, I wasn't nervous entering the operating room as before, and I was able to discuss my 3 Women's Wear daily photos with Dr. Edgerton before the surgery. I asked him for a straight nose, the right size for my face, and long enough so people couldn't see if it were dirty. And he smiled and said, I think I can do that. I used Hemi-Sync until the general anesthesia began, and then immediately afterwards in the recovery room. This 4.5-hour surgery removed and carved my rib and refractured the sinus cavities and orbits. The residents pulled skin from the sides of my face to cover the rib nose, and then they reconstructed nostrils. They later joked that I could never have a facelift because they'd pulled all the available skin the other direction. And one of the residents came in afterwards and said, Gary, watching Dr. Edgerton carve your nose was like watching Michelangelo sculpt a statue. I didn't realize that. I thought they just took out the rib and stuffed it in. I had no idea what they did. But the rib is a solid bone that goes in the 2 directions. You all have cartilage. Mine is stiff and it doesn't move. But it's not attached to the top or bottom. It's different. On awakening, I was happy, tired, and calm without pain. I listened to the tapes constantly, had little swelling, and needed no pain medication. It was an incredible gift and freedom. Packing was taken out the second day. My new nose looked beautiful. I was sent home that day instead of the 2 weeks expected in hospital. Suddenly outside, I could smell the clean, fresh world again compared to the hospital recycled air. I wore a metal nose splint, since the rib wasn't attached to the top or bottom, so that its shape would survive if I walked into a glass door. My job for the rest of my life was to protect my rigid nose. It hurt if touched, and I had to be careful pulling clothes over my head. I couldn't sleep on my stomach, and I had to turn my head away before anybody hugged me so it wouldn't get squashed. The worst thing was that the nose was even more sensitive to barometer pressures and temperatures than the rest of the body. It hurt dramatically when I went outside in the cold. The nostrils were tiny, and I couldn't insert a Kleenex to clean them, but nobody could see if they were dirty. The next surgery was to graft flaps for lips from the palate and reshape the cheeks and the chin. I would have my mouth sewn together for 6 weeks for the grafts to heal before they could be sculpted into lips. A tiny hole would be left on one side to use the Breck feeder. I asked if I might use the Monroe emergency series in the operating room instead of general anesthesia, and Dr. Edgerton agreed. He said they'd have backup IV, and he'd just use local lidocaine if I needed it. I was thrilled to try another step with Hemi-Sync. It was such a gift to forget the old queasiness, terror, and urge to run out of that hospital to avoid the surgery. I was calm and happy at being able to control my own pain. Dr. Edgerton in the operating room assigned a nurse to sit at the head of the table and turn the tapes over every 45 minutes. It was before auto reverse came out. I smiled at him and I drifted off happily with Bob Monroe's voice telling me I was not alone. Suddenly I was jolted awake with no tape. I knew I couldn't open my mouth to talk, so I tried to catch Dr. Edgerton's eyes as he worked above my face. No luck. So then I made a noise in my throat, and rolled my eyes toward the tape player. Dr. Edgerton looked very startled, not expecting his patient to talk to him on the operating table. He smiled at me and he asked the nurse to check the tape player. The batteries had run out. He asked me if I could hold on because he just had a little more to do on my chin. I said, because I had no choice. I was trapped, and frantically I thought of 55515 and breathed carefully and made it through. Dr. Edgerton sent his nurse to buy more batteries for me in the hospital shop, so I had the tapes again in the recovery room as a consolation. And Bob Monroe had talked about not being tape dependent and learning to create that state on one's own. I just didn't think I would be doing it so soon. The 5-hour surgery was a success, and even more so since I used the Monroe Emergency Series without general anesthesia. Now I could be put on the 5-year schedule, cancellation list sooner. I recovered quickly with my daily use of Monroe, Breck feeders through the tiny hole, and my magic slate again. The hard part was not being able to brush my new teeth, so I squirted food as far back in my throat as I could with the Breck feeders. I tried not to think of existing for 6 weeks with my mouth sewn shut for those grafts to grow from the palate to the lip area. But using Hemi-Sync helped me be calmer and control my pain. I began to have vivid dreams and stronger intuition. In 6 weeks, I returned for the next surgery of lip sculpting, chin and cheek revision, and tracheotomy scar revision. This time I felt like an old hand using Hemi-Sync. Dr. Edgerton was so impressed, he asked to listen to the tapes to see if his other patients could benefit from them. It was even easier to float through the surgery and heal faster than the agonizing days of the past. I regained beginning lip shapes, a tiny tracheotomy scar, which didn't hurt anymore, and normal-looking cheeks and chin. I continued on Breck feeders to protect the lip vermilion, but I could finally brush my teeth again. After a few more months, there was another surgery of lip and chin sculpting and reducing the huge scar around my right knee from the car engine. With Hemi-Sync, I was confident and flew through the 5-hour surgery without pain and left the hospital in a few days. I was back on crutches and Breck feeders, but glad to be on the road to recovery again. I learned how to not bend my knee for 6 months so the new scar wouldn't stretch. And after the sutures were removed, I had a 1-year wait for the face to settle in place before the next surgery. During these years, other Hemi-Sync packages were developed, which I used along with the Emergency Series, renamed Surgery Series and narrated by Dr. Dar. I was helped by the Stroke Series, the Positive Immunity Program, Going Home, and Pennies Opening the Heart. My children used the Learning Pal series with their students. I gave other friends cancer support and music. I played Hemi-Sync in my music music in my house most of the time. Since 1982, Bob Monroe had written his second book and was finishing his third. Several technical books on Hemi-Sync had been published, and the new H+ series was developed. And the world evolved from tapes to CDs and iPods. When I returned to the maxillofacial clinic, the next plan was to revise chin, lips, eyelids, and foot. I was calm through the 5-hour surgery and relaxed afterwards with Hemi-Sync. I was on crutches again, and I couldn't lower my head below my heart for 6 months. But I learned how to cope with the new restrictions. And then I took a creative writing class, and I had to write about something in my life and read it out loud the next week. I wrote about the beginning of the car crash, just what you all heard today. And after I finished reading, somebody asked, "What happens next?" And the teacher told me I had a book there which would help others. And I began writing and found that I loved it. After all my years of hard work in business, I was able to enjoy the privilege of not working as I went through the reconstructive surgeries and then writing as a career. Dr. Edgerton suggested another surgery for more chin revisions in October 1990, which was filmed by the Monroe Institute as I used the emergency series. Both Dr. Edgerton and I did interviews with the film crew before the surgery began. The surgery lasted 2 hours. I was relaxed and calm again in the recovery room and gave another interview there for the film. I healed quickly and got on with real life. And now we'll watch the brief film of the TV show Sightings.
Psychosomatic illness is a medical fact. Mainstream medicine accepts without question that some people can make themselves sick through the power of the mind. So could the reverse be true? Are we capable of psychosomatic wellness? Can the same mind that creates illness also be used to heal?
All I remember thinking was, my son has to be all right. I don't care what happens to me as long as he's not hurt.
So I got out of the car. Well, first I looked at my mom, and I was just like totally shocked, you know, I just didn't expect it.
I lost consciousness at the time of the impact, and I had a very intense near-death experience at that time. I went through the standard phases of going through the tunnel of light. Then I went into a beautiful garden.
And I was just like, what do I do? What do I do? You know? And I just yelled, you know, my mom's name to her. You know, I was just shaking her, just wake up, come on, you know, wake up.
And then suddenly my father was there, and he had been dead for about 10 years. And I said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." And he said, "Well, I'm glad to see you too, but you can't stay." And I said, "No, I've gotten here, I'm not leaving." And he said, "No, you have to go back because there's a purpose you haven't fulfilled." And as he was saying that, my son was reviving me, and I could feel myself being pulled back into my body. And he brought me back.
That was in 1982. And from that day to this, Gari Carter has felt that her near-death experience was a turning point. She was being allowed to come back for a reason that she could barely know as she clung to life.
I kept demanding to see my mother, and my father finally said no, that she didn't have a face anymore, and he was not going to let me see her.
Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say her injuries were probably 9 to 10 in severity. So certainly very high levels of injury.
My eyes were sewn shut because I had a lot of cuts there. I couldn't talk because I had a tracheotomy. I couldn't smell because I didn't have a nose. I couldn't talk because I didn't have a mouth.
This patient, like many others who have facial injuries, no matter how well the surgeons repair them, they never regained exactly their original normal appearance.
Before that, I had been a model, and people always looked at me with admiration. And after the accident, without a nose and without a mouth and without a face, people looked at me with looks of horror. And I felt very guilty for upsetting them. And I wanted enough of a face to be able to blend into a crowd again and not scare people.
Her surgeons warned that the reconstruction process would be long and arduous, requiring at least 10 separate surgeries. After the first operation, the pain was unbearable.
It was just horrible to see, my mom just sitting there in agony, just unable to do anything, and just absolutely in pain.
Intense pain, like a symphony, I remember. It was always there, always intense. It was just horrible. It was a dreadful, dreadful time.
The second surgery was even more excruciating. On the eve of her third surgery, Gary's dread intensified.
And I was scared. I was really scared of the pain. And this very pushy friend called me up and said, "I've heard about these wonderful pain control tapes you might like to use since you have all these years of surgery ahead of you."
The tapes came from the nonprofit Monroe Institute, an education and research facility in Virginia. Here, sound waves are used to affect brain waves, often with amazing results.
We teach people how to use the power of their mind, how to use this power to promote healing processes, to promote optimal learning, to gain control of their life and their perceptions as they move through life.
The Institute was founded on the principle that focused states of consciousness can be achieved by listening to combinations of sounds that alter brainwave patterns. In this focused state, pain can be eliminated. It's called the Hemi-Sync method.
We put one sound in one ear and another sound in the other ear, and when these sounds work together inside the brain, they alter your state of consciousness. They actually change the brain waves inside your head.
It's not subliminal. The tones are a part either of music or of ocean waves, depending on the different tapes.
For Gary, the tapes had an amazing effect. Her pain threshold changed so dramatically, she asked if she could listen to a tape in the operating room.
I took the tapes in with me for this surgery to make my nose, and I told Dr. Edgerton if the tapes worked fine, but if not, I'd like my codeine right away, please. And he smiled and he said he thought it would be an interesting experiment, and all the doctors and nurses were quite interested as well.
And some of these operations, of course, can be very painful for a time. But with the aid of the tapes, even going down to the operating room area with the tapes playing, she really seemed to deal with the anxiety issues and the post-operative pain issues very well. And I think a lot of the staff were very impressed by how much these tapes helped her.
I was relaxed and happy going down into the operating room. It was like going to a fun party instead of the shakes and the queasiness I would have had before.
In Gary's case, it was very clear she did not request very much anesthetic when she was using the Monroe tapes.
The feeling when somebody's cutting on you when you use these tapes is one of being disassociated. You feel the touching and the pulling or pushing as they're cutting or stitching, but there's no pain associated with it. It's just like a very gentle touch.
Where you hypnotize somebody and you tell them you're going to burn them, but you actually reach out and just lightly touch them, the body believes so strongly that it's going to be burned that it will be blistered. Well, you want to use that same kind of mind power to make the body believe so strongly that it's going to get healthy and it's going to have less pain, that it actually kicks in and provides all those things that are necessary for that to happen.
I had no pain after that surgery whatsoever. I used the Monroe audio tapes, and there was minimal swelling and bruising, and I went home from the hospital in 2 days instead of 10.
The whole theory opens a lot of interesting possibilities. Well, we are just in the very early stages of understanding brain function.
Gari continued to use her tapes through 7 more operations. Today, she looks forward to a pain-free life and feels her purpose now is to help others through lectures and her book, Healing Myself.
We truly are all one, and we're all here to help each other. And that's what I want this book to do for other people.
I've been blessed to have the face that I have, but I think in a way Mommy's more blessed to have what's happened to her, because it's changed her and it's given her a whole new outlook. And this is only a skin for me now. It used to be an identity, and now my identity's in here. It's not here.
I guess what really had an effect on me was seeing my mother utilizing these tapes and utilizing the potential within herself to heal. I thought, wow, if that's possible, it really opens the door for so many more things.
The meaning of life to me before the accident was totally based on outer appearances. Now, in my second life, I look at the light bulbs. I don't look at the lampshades as I did in my first life.
The Monroe Institute is not suggesting that every patient should forego anesthesia in the operating room, but they do believe that as long as conventional medicine is standing by, alternative therapies should be given a chance to work first.
Thanks. Writing my book, Healing Myself, brought me closer to the Monroe Institute people, all of whom accepted me as I was with no questions. It seemed as if I had a new family. As I proceeded on the manuscript, I asked if Bob might write me a foreword, and he graciously wrote a spectacular one. When I tried to thank him, he reminded me that I had done the work and he played a tiny part. I knew very differently about his modesty. I'd learned so much from him and his wife Nancy. I treated myself to a gateway program at Monroe when I finished writing the manuscript. From the first day, I wondered why I'd put it off so long. It was like coming home. During the first exercise in the check unit, I felt a hand come out of the wall towards me and take my arm to pull me through the wall with it. I was waiting for the pain to start and begin working, and I pushed that arm away. And afterwards, I wished I'd gone with that arm. And let go of my 10-year pattern of surgery pain control. All week, I kept trying to relax and enjoy Hemi-Sync with no results. Skip Atwater assured me that I would get past that stage, and the very last day I did. It was a new freedom for me to be able to use that technology as I chose, and not to work to conquer pain. I didn't know that Hemi-Sync could be fun. Leslie France, director of the professional division, wrote a meticulous, clear explanation of Hemi-Sync to include with my book. That began another amazing friendship, and I still cherish her mug with the affirmations on it. Leslie helped answer my questions as I wrote, and put me in touch with Shirley Bliley and Ann Vaughn for research, Penny Holmes, Laurie and Maria Monroe, Scooter and Joe McMoneagle, A.J. Honeycutt, and many others for information. All the staff and family were gracious, friendly, and thoughtful. I asked if Eleanor Frieda, Bob's editor, would help me find a publisher since I didn't have an agent. She had just retired and wanted time to work in her garden, but agreed to give me suggestions after reading the manuscript. Eleanor later told me she was afraid of not keeping an impassive face when she met me after what she'd read. She was pleasantly surprised, and we began a long friendship as mentor-mentee. I stayed with Eleanor over the years at her house with the long line of cat dishes on the floor and the rolling pin in the refrigerator door handles. She explained that it was to stop the raccoons from eating her ice cream after they sneaked in the cat door at night. I was her last visitor at the Westminster Canterbury Memory Care Center before she passed on. Eleanor advised me about query letters to send out, and later helped me choose between the 3 publishers who wanted my book. Hampton Roads Publishing and Frank DeMarco and Bob Friedman were interested in a book which opened the world of Bob Monroe to them. Another wonderful friendship began, since Hampton Roads treated all its authors like family. I took more Monroe Institute programs over the years, which enhanced my life in many other ways. At one, I met Bob Holbrook, who had injuries similar to mine from a car crash. His wife read Healing Myself to him in the hospital, so he knew what stage came next in his facial reconstruction and what to expect. The book became his mentor. We decided that I was his big sister and he was my little brother in our second lives. I always celebrate my second birthday, February 27th, and I encourage Bob to do the same. My Life Changed After Healing Myself was published in 1993. When I held the first copy of the first printing, I was so excited. I knew I was doing what my father told me I had to accomplish in that near-death experience. I was using my life to help others, and I was living my purpose. I went out on the road to publicize the book. For the first year, you're interesting to the world. Since I'm my own agent, I'd set up an event in a town, a talk at a school, bookstore, health food store, spa, and then arranged TV, radio, and newspaper interviews to coordinate. It brought me into the limelight, and I was able to really reach out and help others. One woman saw me on the Good Morning Atlanta TV show. She'd had surgery for cancer of the throat, and she lost facial nerve and muscle control and drooled afterwards. She had not left her house since. She had her daughter bring her to hear my talk, and I was able to tell her about using Hemi-Sync to recover, and guiding a cup to her lips with her tongue, and to do mouth and facial exercises to strengthen her muscles. Her eyes lit up with hope. I was so grateful to be able to pass on what I'd learned. During that time, Hemi-Sync and I moved to Florida to be in a climate where my broken bones didn't hurt from the cold. I made many trips to Philadelphia to help my mother and stepfather with illnesses. I taught Hatha Yoga and Taoist Tai Chi. I traveled overseas again. I raced weekly with the ladies' sailing team. One of the women in my sailing club became ill with breast cancer, and the team took care of her. I took the newly developed Going Home series to her. We used it with great success to keep her and all the caregivers peaceful and calm. At the end, when she was past talking back to any of us, she would still repeat Bob's words each time she heard them on the tape. There are people there to take care of you. Her end was smooth, peaceful, and easy. She wanted her ashes and those of her 3 cats scattered at sea, and a few of us sailed out to do that. As we flung the ashes over the waves, we found she'd put a tiny ceramic cat inside the container. As we threw the cat up, a gull swooped down out of nowhere and grabbed it. And we laughed and we hoped he didn't have indigestion. But we knew that Lynn would have loved it and she was still with us. Thanks to my 10-year training using Hemi-Sync, I was open to complementary medicine as well as allopathic. My job was to stay well and improve mobility. My grafted skin and broken bones were sensitive. I made my own skin lotion, used old-fashioned hankies to avoid irritation of the grafted skin from Kleenex dyes, and kept my gums healthy with food-grade neem oil when I brushed my teeth. I explored alternative ways of healing, used homeopathic and chiropractic doctors, exercised 2 hours daily with Tai Chi, yoga, speech, and physical therapy. A physical therapist had introduced me to Facercises by Carol Maggio. She teaches how to counteract aging in the face, but the exercises were perfect for my situation. From the years of surgery, cutting flesh bothers me, and so I became a vegetarian. I ate healthy food, took supplements, and focused on keeping myself in the best shape possible. If I missed one day of my routine, I could feel it in my body. I'd taken my health for granted until the car crash. Now I had to work at it to not slip back into hurting and immobility. I knew how frail I was and what it was like to be broken. I would rather do maintenance than need repairs the rest of my life. I would never have a perfect face again. My scars became a badge of courage for me, and I called myself the Queen of Scars. My conventional family and friends still refer to me as a hippie chick because I was trying so many new modalities way before they became socially acceptable. I played metamusic daily in my house for calming and healing. If I woke up during the night, I'd listen to my favorite energy walk and slipped back to sleep. I hardly ever needed the pain control part anymore. Hemi-Sync had changed from being a necessity for relief from pain to a helper in my life. It eased me into returning to meditation again, skipping all the beginning steps. After my year on the road promoting healing myself, I wondered what to write about next. I didn't want to go through another car crash for another book topic. And I remembered old journals my mother had given me, written by my great-great-grandfather during the Civil War. No one in my family had ever read them. I pulled them out and began reading his private thoughts. It was difficult to decipher his writing at first, but eventually I knew what Franklin Dick was going to say before he said it. My great-great-grandfather had been an attorney in St. Louis in 1844, was involved in the first local event as the Civil War began, and wrote to Lincoln of the conditions in the state as he served as U.S. Provost Marshal General. His experience was another pivotal point in his life, just as the car crash had been for me. I did background research and pulled the manuscript together. I realized I was removed from surgeries and the suffering of others. The car crash and my work with Hemi-Sync had made me intuitive physically. I began to study complementary medicine and received degrees in Reiki, craniosacral therapy, therapeutic touch, Raphaelite work, and polarity. I practiced on friends, but I realized my focus needed to be on writing. I joined the Dolphin Energy Club at TMI, the Sufi Healing Order, and the Order of St. Luke. I used diodes to protect myself from EMF radiation and an ionizer around my neck for flights, which I still use. I've been invited to speak several times at the Monroe Institute over the years. There was a presentation at the professional division when Healing Myself was published. The Institute has carried my book ever since. Another time I spoke about intuition. I taught a group of scientists how to see auras. They were all very reserved as I demonstrated, but afterwards each one came up privately to tell me he really did see the auras. We all have that ability as a child until it's schooled out of us. The next decade was filled with family obligations and stress, alleviated by Hemi-Sync. I was on call for my mother as her health declined, so I spent more time with her in Baltimore than I did at home. My mother and I were opposites. She cultivated and invented maladies for attention all her life. I was pro-health and anti-drugs. I remembered what a wonderful advocate she had been for me after the car crash, and I was really happy to help her in her time of need. Though she didn't believe in complementary medicine, she accepted what I had done with Hemi-Sync, the freedom it gave me from pain, and the control over my life. I was able to use metamusic and some of the healing modalities I had learned on her at times, but not often. In 2010, at age 95, she fell and was in a coma. I brought in Going Home. My children and I stayed with her. I reminded her of the near-death experience I'd had and what fun it is to die, and how I'd never be afraid of dying again. She gently slipped away, helped with Hemi-Sync. I began contra dancing as another exercise I enjoyed and met a wonderful man and groups of interesting people all over the country. Contra dance uses live Celtic bands and was introduced to this country by the early Scottish and Irish. I continued with meditation, speech and physical therapy, yoga, and Tai Chi for 2 hours every morning. I studied vision improvement with the Bates method. Speech therapy taught me how to exercise my one vocal cord. I still have trouble swallowing effectively, and I'm unable to project my voice, and it hurts me to talk at length. The other thing is that the porcelain teeth get very dried out as I talk, and I have to keep them moistened as well. As one ages, the vocal flaps are less flexible and the voice diminishes. So I have to work on that with exercises every day. And I've learned to listen more and talk less. My life since the crash is filled with self-assessment, similar to a concerned mother. Am I standing straight? Are my feet aligned when I walk? Are my lips mobile? Am I sitting straight? Are my fingers loose? Are my knees flexible? If I notice some body part slipping, I put more energy into it. Doctors, chiropractors, speech, and physical therapists love me because I always do what they say and improve. Their other patients atrophy, but I'm determined to have increased mobility. My second book, Troubled State, The Civil War Journals of Franklin Archibald Dick, was published in 2008 by a small university press in Missouri. I did a circle book tour around Missouri and up the East Coast. The publisher's goal was to have a book in every library as reference in Missouri during the year, which we reached. I speak to Civil War roundtable groups around the country with this book. I continued searching for alternative medicine. I tried an experimental lotion to relieve scar tissue. A helpful doctor researched amino acids and found a combination which would soften the really hard lump in my chin. Speech therapy taught me to massage away the stiffness, and I work on my lips and chin every morning. I was terrified by a routine trip to the dentist when a hole was found in the grafted upper jaw, the maxilla. I was told the bridges would have to be removed and I'd need surgery and the hole filled up. I called a medical friend who sent me to Dr. Jack Garvey, an electronic homeopathic and acupuncture physician, to discuss the potential infection in the space. Dr. Garvey looked over my x-rays and medical records and said he could clear the infection. I was relieved and my eyes filled with tears. Then he asked if I'd like to regenerate the bone and tissue as well instead of surgery. I was overwhelmed and accepted. That began about 2 years of hard work. It involved having him treat me, being monitored by his dentist, daily use of homeopathics, and an electrical TENS unit to start all the bone growing again. Periodic x-rays were done to check the area. And at the end of 2 years, all the bone and tissue was regenerated. I went to see the surgeon who'd done the original grafting of the jaws under Dr. Edgerton. Dr. Chong was practicing in Florida, near me, and he said that the tissue and the bone looked healthier than when he'd done the graft in 1982. We laughed about my mother and I knitting baby caps for his first child born when he did the grafting. His grown-up son was now in the medical field as well. Because the car crash had opened my face to the eyes, cataracts and glaucoma developed from the damage, and I had surgeries for each, using Hemi-Sync again and breathing through each one. My father had died of melanoma, and I've had numerous basal cells removed since his death, now all with Hemi-Sync. I still don't like being cut upon, but I know I'm not alone with Monroe's tools by my side. Interestingly, I entered an age recently where my younger baby boomer friends were developing wrinkles and body problems. My uncle used to call it an organ recital. I've been doing face exercises to keep my face active, and I never thought about wrinkles. It gave me a certain wisdom early on to be an example to others. At age 42, I jumped 3 decades ahead in life and dealt with all the issues my contemporaries were just experiencing. It's been an ongoing dress rehearsal for aging. It surprised me that I keep feeling younger as my friends were feeling older. Writing has not been a retreat from the world for me, but rather a way to enhance the world and help others. I play metamusic concentration to aid my writing. Once the manuscript is finished, one is out on the road for a year in the limelight. So writers have to be both introverts and extroverts. Once I finished Troubled State, I began on a manuscript from another ancestor's Civil War journals. Colonel W.J. Leonard commanded a Union Legion from Maryland and was captured and put in Richmond's Libby prison. This was the pivotal experience that changed his life, and I could see the parallels between our lives as I had with the previous ancestor. After my mother's death, I was able to travel again. I began practicing Kundalini Yoga, which helps the spine be flexible. Kundalini says you are as old as your spine. I found I didn't have to visit a chiropractor weekly to keep aligned after that. I also began Pilates, which helped me with my daily physical therapy exercises and cured sciatica. I love my weekly visits to the warm mineral springs, which Ponce de Leon called the Fountain of Youth. I use a biomat and an inversion table for healing and balancing my body daily. Speech therapy helps with my voice and throat issues. I find as I age, the different body parts speak up, and I have to change directions in physical therapy and put more time into keeping limber. It's still important to do my entire routine every day. My Yoga Teachers Association in Florida used to say, use it or lose it, rest and rot. And I'm determined not to rot. My daughter wanted me to mention that during my family's visit at Christmas 2014, I crashed on my bike and hurt my wrist. I got up and continued with the day of family photos on the beach and dinner. I kept saying I'd be fine. My son and daughter insisted on taking me to the ER after dinner. The doctor said the x-ray showed many old breaks, and then he noticed a new one on the wrist. With a cast, I refused all medication, returned to Hemi-Sync to heal faster, and amazed the orthopedic doctor. Monroe has been a touchstone for me to relieve any pain or stress in my life. I step right back into those shoes so easily. In my life, it's evolved from a crucial need to a helper to a luxury. When I went to the Winter Solstice Kundalini retreat in 2015, I met Dr. Gari Carter, who does yogic healing and uses a cyber-scan biofeedback device from Germany based on Nikola Tesla's technology. I had a session with Dr. Carter where he mentioned numerous effects from my reconstruction, all of which were correct. I told him nothing before he started, of course. Then he asked me gently about my thoughts of suicide. I've never had any such thoughts. He rephrased the question again very intently, and again I said no. And then I remembered how my mother was always suicidal and mentioned it. And he said the machine picks up DNA patterns, and obviously I'd worked through that one myself already. Since I've been seeing him, I've had several improvements. The greatest is that the movements of the bones in my head from barometer changes has totally ceased. It used to immobilize me with pain for days, and even Hemi-Sync couldn't help. I used to take massive doses of magnesium and calcium to try to balance out the pressures inside the head. And it alleviated the pain a little bit, but not much. And now, after 34 years, I don't have to fear storms. I look forward to continuing with this modality. My partner and I just returned from a 6-week hiking and sailing trip in Southeast Asia. And while in Tasmania, we returned last week. While in Tasmania, I walked next to a woman on a hike on the Arthur River. She confided to me that she'd had a stroke, and she still had trouble with speech. I told her about my background and the stroke recovery series, which helped me. Amazingly, she had not used physical or speech therapy, which I also recommended. Her eyes lit up as I gave her my card, and she realized there was still hope for her. She asked if I worked for the Monroe Institute. And I said, no, I was just an ambassador. And privately, I thank Bob Monroe and the multitude of people who've helped me on my journey again. We never think it'll be us, but we all have overcome adversity, and we all have our stories. A friend recently gave me a copy of 7 Questions You'll Ask at the End of Your Life by Mark Chernoff, and I'd like to pass them on to you. Number 1, am I proud of how I lived? You don't need to write these down because I have a handout for you. But just think about them. Number 1, am I proud of how I lived? 2, what did I discover? 3, how well did I play the hand I was dealt? 4, did I take enough responsibility? 5, what struggles did I conquer? 6, how sincerely did I live through love? And 7, how much of my story did I actually write? I will be 76 in a week, and my life is wonderful, and I earned it. Thank you. I really appreciate your attention to my little story. I do have handouts of the quotes, and they'll be available this afternoon in the back. And we have time for a few questions before we go to lunch. Yes?
Could you repeat and say more about the treatment you've been getting? Tesla, something?
The question was, would I repeat more about the healing I've been getting with the Tesla-inspired machine, the CyberScan? You can look up online CyberScan. It's made in Germany. There are only 3 people in this country using it, all of whom are in California. And Dr. Hari Khalsa is a Sikh and a Kundalini teacher and healer. He's in California. When I did the machine the first time, it's a small little box, and you simply put your hand on it, and it reads your hand within just a few minutes. What I do now, since he's in California and we're not together at the winter solstice retreat as we were in the winter, is I either send him a clipping of my hair or my fingernail clippings, and he puts those on the machine and that reads it. And then after that, he interprets it, and he then sends you back 2 bottles of water, which are charged with whatever it was that the machine read that you were going through at the time. And he also sends you usually about 2 pages worth of daily affirmations to say, which are dealing with whatever you're going through at the time. And I only tried it because a friend of mine had tried it the year before and said, wow, it made such a difference for her. So I thought, well, I'm here. I'm just going to try it. And so you could do 1 scan or you could do a series. So I signed up for 1 scan to be very careful and try it. And I was, after the questions about suicide and the other things he asked me, I thought, I'm doing the series. So I am. And the other thing he sends you together with the remedies to take 3 times a day and the affirmations is a little card that's charged to protect you from electromagnetic frequency. And that goes between your mattress and your springs on your bed. And each time you send him a new sample, you send the card back and he recharges it again. It's pretty amazing stuff. And not only the bones in the head, but quite a few other things I wasn't even aware of have just been alleviated, and I'm just better and better. So I highly recommend it. Yes?
I just want to say thank you, and so much of your indomitable spirit has come through, and what a strong, wonderful individual you are. What really struck me strangely, I mean, the whole story was incredible, and not incredible like not believable, but like incredibly wonderful. But what struck me, since there's so many doctors in the room, is that the one thing that really hit me was that somebody told you you might not walk again, or you're not likely to walk again. And I think, back to Norman's presentation earlier, how a doctor can help you or really hurt you in life by saying something like that. You're not going to walk again, or you're not going to have a child, or you're not going to do this. And how that can really screw you up.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. The doctors can be helpers or non-helpers. That's one thing I really appreciated about Dr. Edgerton. He was the most gentlemanly, thoughtful, kind man I had ever met in my life to that point. And one of his nurses said it was so interesting to watch the residents underneath him, because they'd come in as these brash young medical students, all moving people around like sacks of flour and saying things like, you'll never walk again and whatever. And after a rotation with him, they would be just as sweet and calm and thoughtful as he was. He was just an incredible man, and he passed that gift on to so many doctors. So I do hope that word gets out there, because Doctors are trained to do their craft. They're trained to do whatever they learn, but they're not necessarily trained in the empathy of thinking about it from the patient's point of view. They're trained to do their job. So I totally understand that, and it makes me very careful about who works on me now and how their outlook is. Just what we heard earlier. It's very important. I say affirmations every day to myself, not only the ones from the CyberScan machine, but other ones as well. So very good point. Absolutely. Okay, so thank you very much and have a delicious lunch.